And here's a strawberry milkshake for the sweet girl." Little giggles followed as I put the glass down. The diner was a little less crowded compared to other Friday evenings. "Thank you, Elena." I bent down to her height, and she placed her lips on my cheek. This was our usual. Almost a few months ago, she had walked in with Stacy, her babysitter. She was kind of bummed because apparently some kids at her school had been mean to her. Some kids can be really cruel. The other night, I was serving this table, and a little boy, after a brief observation, had stated that I was dumb, because all blondes are supposedly dumb. I had kept my mouth shut and walked away, knowing very well that nothing decent would have come out of it. Well, as I was saying, back then I had cheered her up with a milkshake on the house, and at the end of the day she had officiated that we were best friends. Making friends can be so easy for children. "You're welcome, sweetheart." I kissed her cheek, causing her to grin widely. "I am sure Ava comes here mostly to see you. Milkshakes are just an excuse." Stacy smiled at me, the skin at the corner of her eyes wrinkling with the action. Ava had been visiting the Treats for almost a year now, and I had never seen her with her parents or family. I wouldn't lie that I had not been a little curious, but I didn't like my nose where it didn't belong. If it's so, I am glad. I love seeing her. I passed Stacy a smile and lightly ruffled Ava's hair before excusing myself from there. Walking inside the kitchen, I put the tray down, a smile tugging at my mouth from the latest conversation I had with that sweet kid, which was a rare occurrence considering the number of unpleasant customers we had to deal with on a daily basis. It, however, turned into a frown as soon as the latest concerns came swimming back to my mind. My dad's health, let's say, had been better than this, and the treatments had been charging a hefty price. After the blockage in his heart was diagnosed, he couldn't continue with his job, and our savings were being sizably drained out. A surgery was required to be performed, and it would be expensive, to say the least. Though Dad had been trying to hide it from us, but it didn't get past us, that all that had left him feeling helpless. I pressed my fingers against my forehead and shut my eyes. "Elena!" I looked up, surprised that I hadn't noticed Olivia walk in. "Liv, hey!" I tried forcing a small smile, which, at best, came out as a grimace. Balancing emotions was never a strong pursuit of mine. Putting on a facade and smiling when I got matters pressing me was out of my abilities. Liv exhaled. "You are worrying too much." Concern reflected in her voice. Olivia had been my best friend from primary school, and we had been inseparable ever since. She had been there for my first breakup. She had consoled me after I had embarrassed myself in front of the whole class, and the list went on. I can't help it. Things are not the best, and my income is hardly helping. Saying it out loud only added to the weight of the predicament I was in. "I know, but stressing this much can't be good for you. You're already working 2 jobs. I worked as an HR executive at SalesSpace, and I took up serving at Treats as my second job. My current financial conditions had me in this predicament. "You don't understand. It wasn't loud, but dismissive." Yes, I meant it. She was an event manager and quite successful, might I add. Her parents weren't dependent on her either. Don't get me wrong, I was happy that she was in a good place in her life, but she wouldn't completely understand how stressful things currently were for me. Yeah, I don't. Nobody understands what it's like unless they are in your shoes. But what I understand is that you're working your ass off. You're doing your best. She was almost shouting, and I was grateful that the diner was almost empty. "No, I'm not. I shouldn't have left my last job." I spoke, gently hitting the edge of the counter with my foot. Before Treats, I worked as a bartender in a club where I was making much more than this. That wasn't an option. How could you have possibly worked under that perverted guy? She sounded shocked that I was at all considering it. A few weeks back, I wouldn't have, actually. Workplace harassment by a sleazy, perverted boss, the same old thing. Pressing my lips in a tight line, I ran my hand through the length of my hair. I had applied to a number of firms, hoping I could switch to a better-paying job, but I was yet to hear back from them. "I don't know, Liv. I was cut off by a squeaky voice. Elena? Are you sad?" Ava stood there, looking up at me with her bright, dewy eyes. I sighed before a small yet genuine smile touched my lips. I crouched down in front of her. "Maybe," I shrugged. "Don't be sad. Do you want candy?" The corners of her lips dipped down in distress. I smiled and shook my head at her suggestion, although I would very much want a hug. She stuck her arms out towards me eagerly. Wrapping her hands around my neck, she kissed my cheek before pulling back and smiling at me. "Are you happy now?" Her eyes shone hopefully, which had me nodding at once. "I am. See? I'm smiling." I flicked her nose, causing a small giggle to escape her lips. She was precious. For a child her age to care so much was rare. "Ava, we need to go home now." Stacy, who had been standing behind her, said, "Okay." She looked back at me and waved. "Bye, Elena." I smiled at her. "Bye, Ava." The bell rang as Stacy and Ava left the diner. "The kid is so sweet," Liv smiled. "She is. Kids have got such simple lives. Candy is the solution to all their problems." I chuckled, and Liv joined before we fell into a comfortable silence. She brought her hand forward and encouraged me. "You are applying for the jobs. I know you're going to land one." "Hope so." Chapter R.Y. Lan. I want this report completed by the end of the day. I slammed the poor excuse of a report on the desk and glared at the man who kept standing there like a stupid. It has been only a week since he had joined, and my patience was running thin. Do you understand? He flinched at my hard tone. "Yes, Mr. Parker." Just then, the door to my cabin opened and my dad walked in, followed by our lawyer. If I were to go by my dad's expression, it was something concerning. I shifted my gaze back to my personal assistant still standing in front of me. "Leave." He quickly grabbed hold of the file and scurried out of the cabin. "Dad?" Both him and Mr. Davis took the seats opposite me. "Rylan, Mr. Davis is here to show you your grandfather's will." It wasn't something I was expecting. Granddad passed away about a month ago, and his will hadn't been brought up since. I leaned back in my seat and loosened the tie around my neck. "I am busy right now, Dad." "Can't it wait?" He sighed before glancing at Mr. Davis, who had quite a serious expression. "I am afraid not." My right eye twitched as I mentally clawed at all the possible conditions the will might put forth. I nodded and looked at Mr. Davis to proceed. "Mr. Parker, your grandfather had mentioned in his will that you get to inherit Parker Realty provided you settle down." He stopped for a quick second to judge my reaction before continuing. "You are required to get married." I stared back, unblinking, at the expectant faces of the two men seated in front of me. I am not in the mood for some jokes right now. I looked between both of them, who maintained their serious stances. Granddad would often advise me on how I should settle down, start a family, and to think that he put this condition in his will wasn't too absurd, but my mind was in denial. It was Dad who exhaled. He isn't joking. "Your grandfather wrote in his will that he wishes to see you settle down with a decent girl of your choice and provide a family to Ava." Clearly, I still hadn't grasped the seriousness of the situation, considering I wasn't feeling the helplessness that I should drown in at this revelation. I was still searching for words when Mr. Davis spoke further. "If not fulfilled after your father, it goes to the Andersons." My head shot up in a microsecond, almost giving me a snapped neck. "Andersons? Our rival?" Our lawyer warily nodded before I slammed a fist on the table, making him flinch in his place. I was out of my seat and walking towards the window, absolutely clueless as to who in their right mind would do that. Was he in need of some kind of medical help and we had overlooked it? I asked. "Rylan." Dad sounded offended. "That would explain this will, because this is clearly the most ridiculous fucking thing I have ever heard in my life." While Dad looked exhausted, Davis looked scared. Scared of whom? Me? The only scary thing there was that will? Granddad actually wrote this? Was I hoping that I would be offered a totally different answer? Something like they had planned some April Fool's prank, though it was mid-September? Probably. He did. Mr. Stead. Davis awkwardly shifted in his seat, and the urge to toss him out of the cabin was too strong. I don't get it, Dad. Why do I have to marry? Ava has a family. She has me. She has you and Stacy. This is her family. I reasoned, but the shake of his head told me that he was anything but convinced. The little girl needs a mother in her life. I shut my eyes for a brief second in annoyance. This single statement had always felt like a blow to all the efforts I had put in for Ava over the years. She doesn't! I am the only parent she needs in her life. Even as I said it, my confidence faltered a bit. I had gone out of the way to be the best parent to Ava. Yet, a weak voice lingered in the back of my mind which claimed otherwise. Dad slightly tilted his head to the side while staring straight at me. You know it yourself. He sounded confident, like he had heard my earlier thoughts. I am serious, son. I know how much you have tried to always be there for Ava, but like every other child, she needs a mother. That's a void in her life. I can see it. Most probably your grandfather did too. I pressed my fingers against my forehead and leaned back in my seat. Even if Dad was right, I wasn't prepared for a wife. I hadn't given relationships and dating a single thought after her. And here we were, talking marriage. I need time to think about it. When I raised my head, they still were sitting in front of me with grim expressions, like there was something else I was yet to learn about. The thought alone was dreadful. Mr. Davis drummed his fingers on the desk before letting it out. You have 1 year before you settle down. I could feel an approaching headache, and undoubtedly it was going to stay for a while now. There's a deadline. My voice came out icy. Dad hesitantly nodded, and I honestly wanted to bang my head against the wall, but settled for a humorless chuckle. I was anything but amused. And what else? Does he need me to impregnate my wife with 12 kids? Would he like that? One might consider it aggressive sarcasm, but honestly, I was skeptical. At this point, I wasn't putting anything past him to put it in his will. No such thing mentioned. Mr. Davis shrinked a little under my glare while Dad cast a worried glance at me, probably thinking that I was losing it. Well, I wasn't too far from it either. I'll leave you to it. Both of them were on their feet and in the next moment out of my cabin, leaving me in turmoil. Chapter 03, Rylan. I discarded the coat and leaned back against the couch. There had been a lot of work pressure since the last few days, and topping that was Granddad's will that had me stressed. I had been pushing it for some months now. Daddy? I opened my eyes to look at my daughter, who stood there with a cup of coffee, Stacy close behind her. Yes, sweetie. I smiled at her. I brought you coffee. She carefully brought the cup forward, her eyes trained on them like splitting a moment of attention would spill the drink. You did? That's so sweet. Taking the cup from her hand, I placed it on the table beside me. Come here. I picked her up and sat her on my lap. I'll put her to sleep, I told Stacy. No, it's okay, son. I'll wait. Ava put her head on my chest and played with the shirt button. Stacy had been staying with our family for as long as I could remember. She had always been there for me, treated me like her own. If I trusted any person with Ava more than myself, that would be her. It's fine, Stacy, I insisted. You should call it a night. Although very reluctantly, she nodded. Good night, Rylan. Good night. Nodding, she walked away, leaving us alone in each other's peaceful company. Only Ava had the power to ease some of my stress simply by her presence. So will you tell me what happened at school? I asked, combing her hair with my fingers. What happens every day, but today I made a drawing. Can I show you later? She mumbled sleepily into my chest while I hummed. Daddy? She spoke after a minute. She pulled back to stare at my face. Tomorrow is a holiday, right? She asked hopefully that her dad wasn't going to work on weekends too. I couldn't help but feel a little guilty that I wasn't giving her more time. Yes. Her eyes, which were once sleepy, gleamed with excitement. Can we go for milkshakes? I chuckled. Sure, I will take you to the best place for milkshakes, I said. But a frown came upon her face instead of the smile that I was expecting. No, Daddy, we will go to Tweets. Took me a second to get the actual word. Treats? I corrected her, to which she smiled sheepishly. I had collected from Stacy that they regularly visited this diner. Yes, I want to meet Elena. I saw her last week. A smile broke out on her face as she mentioned some Elena. Who's Elena? If possible, her smile widened. Elena is my best friend. The elation in her voice told me that she really liked this person, probably some waitress at the diner. Okay, we'll go and meet your friend. Now, let's put you to sleep, yes? She nodded before wrapping her hands around my neck tightly. I smiled when she put her face in the crook of my neck, waiting to be carried to her bed. Elena, enjoy your meal. Quickly passing a polite smile to the one seated at the last booth, I walked back to the counter. The diner was quite full. I was about to grab my pad to take another booth when I heard Ava's voice. The next few seconds were chaotic. I turned around and everything happened in a snap of fingers. She collided with the legs of Amy, another waitress who lost her balance, and the glasses of juice she was carrying crashed down on the floor. What the hell? A lady sitting in the adjacent booth shrieked. My eyes fell upon her dress, which was a bit spoiled by the drinks. A moment of commotion before there was a second of complete silence. I'm sorry. Amy was cut off mid-sentence by the seething customer. Shut up! Is your stupid sorry going to get this stain off? She glared at her before her furious glance settled on Ava, and my heart skipped a beat. And you! Why are you running around? Ava flinched at her tone, and so did I. The way she was glaring at her, one would think she was about to get physical. I am sorry, Ava softly apologized, blinking through her tears. But that did absolutely nothing to pacify the lady. You should be, stupid brat. I was stunned at how rude she was being to a little girl. I did a quick glance over to find some camera. The way she behaved almost made me think that this was going to be an episode of What Would You Do? Talk. Only it wasn't. Ava was a regular here and not some child actor. Miss, I would request you to not speak to a child like that. I pulled Ava to my side, exposing myself to the brunt of her anger. She narrowed her eyes on me. Yeah? And how should I speak to her? I understand you're upset, but this was a mishap. You're scaring her. Bad investment. Every word was falling on deaf ears. And who might you be to tell me that? She barked, almost, and it pretty much snapped my control. A nice person? The same can't be said about you, though. I stared right back at her while a group of teens sitting behind her snickered. Was I risking my job here? Probably. Was I impulsive? When was I not? How dare you talk to me like that? And do you not see my dress? This brat just ruined it. She pointed her finger, glaring viciously at Ava, who flinched and clung to my side. I was irritated at how impudent she was. I forced a breath out. It was an accident, a mistake, and she isn't a brat because she just apologized, after which I don't think she deserves these rude words. It will be safe to say that this was the nicest way in which I could have put them together. The thoughts in my head weren't this courteous, though. Is this how you treat your customers? I will. I will ask you to not finish that sentence. A smooth, deep voice cut in, the kind that is used to command the attention of an entire room. As soon as I turned around, the air was almost stolen out of my lungs. I was no stranger to the likes of good-looking men, but he would totally outclass them in an instant. He was tall, his lean, muscular upper body clad in a black button-down shirt. The waves of dark brown hair accentuated his hazel orbs, and his jawline looked sharp enough to cut through steel. He extended a hand holding out a card. The sleeves were rolled up, exposing his veiny forearm. Call here and provide your details. Your loss will be compensated. His words were sharp, yet his voice low as he looked down at her. The woman was intimidated. It was apparent by the way she struggled to keep her eyes on him. Oh no, you don't have to pay for what this unruly child did. And this lady here deserves to be fired. I couldn't control the urge to roll my eyes. I do have to compensate because this unruly child here is my daughter. My eyes widened at the piece of information. Well, that was some revelation. I saw it in that woman's eyes. She was contemplating apologizing to him. I watched as he held her down with just an icy stare. Must be nice to be able to assert such dominance on strangers. It's better if you accept the compensation and leave right now before I make you pay for harassing my daughter and this young lady here. The conviction in his voice stated that he would live up to his words if defied. I'm, she fumbled with her words. Leave, he gritted out. She looked between us, her face flushed with embarrassment, before rushing out of the diner. The audience we had were now going back to their businesses. I remembered Ava, and one look at her damp face really did upset me. Elena, I am sorry. Another tear slipped out of her eyes and down her cheek. I crouched down in front of her. No, sweetheart, it's okay. You had already apologized. I wiped the tears off her face. That lady was a big meanie. I made a face hoping that she would smile, but the frown on her face was persistent. She scolded you because of me. What will she do to you? Will she hurt you? It was warming to see how thoughtful she was. I was about to comfort her when her father beat me to it. Come here, sweetheart. He picked her up in his arms while she gloomily stared back at him. I recognized a slight British accent. She won't hurt Elena. I won't let her, okay? Him comforting his daughter and Ava looking up at her father with so much. Why was this so difficult to look away from? Maybe because he didn't resemble the cold, intense man I had witnessed just a few moments ago. His face seemed to have lost all that harshness the moment he looked at his daughter. I was far too engrossed in observing what played out in front of me to note the alarm that had gone off in my head. It was too late. He looked up only to catch me staring. Should I explain myself? I panicked. I had no interest in experiencing how it felt to be on the receiving end of his icy stare. But what I didn't expect was for his eyes to trail down the length of me. When his eyes finally came back up, something flashed in them, and it definitely wasn't animosity. What was it? Before I could ponder a second longer, I took the initiative to break the stare, and my eyes immediately found Ava's face. So, milkshake? Chapter 04. Rylan. This wasn't how I had imagined the day to turn out. This day was supposed to be enjoyable for Ava. Instead, she shed tears. I was 1 second away from getting the hell out of this place, but stopped when Ava nodded to a milkshake. That brought me back to the thoughts of a feisty little waitress. Elena. I was intrigued the moment she stepped in and shielded Ava. Why would she do it? Out of pure goodwill? Or was it how she planned on earning Ava's complete trust for some reason? That would justify Ava's undue attachment to her. It's difficult to believe that in today's world, people would lift a finger for someone else unless it's serving some ulterior motives of their own. Could be depressing, seeing things from my perspective, but I deemed it advisable. That's how things work in the real world. One works their way up the ladder and stays on top of their business. My thoughts were interrupted when I saw her walking up to us. A chocolate milkshake for the pretty girl. She stopped before us and most dramatically placed the glass in front of Ava, who in turn giggled. Elena, he is my daddy. Ava grabbed my hand and beamed at her. I suppose that was my cue to introduce myself. Rylan Parker. I stuck my hand out and noticed her look at it. There was this split second of contemplation in her crystal blue eyes before she overcame it. Elena Smith. She passed a polite smile while taking my hand. I stared at her hand and was irked at how perfectly it fit in mine. Retracting my hand, I gulped down my annoyance. You defended my daughter there. You were risking your job. I slightly tilted my head, awaiting an answer. That woman was clearly crossing her limits. Her face contorted a bit in annoyance before she exhaled, and the small smile was back on her face. Would you like to order? A black coffee. She nodded and took her leave. Leaning back in my seat, I watched her retreat till she was out of my sight. The moment we walked in through the door, Ava left my side, hopping her way to Stacy. "Did you and Daddy have fun?" she asked, bringing in a lot of enthusiasm in her words. A lot of fun," I drawled, to which Ava seemed to take no notice. Stacy, on the other hand, raised a brow at me. "What happened?" There couldn't have been a more appropriate timing for my phone to ring and interrupt us, saving me the trouble of engaging in an otherwise long conversation. I, however, was less amused the second I saw the name flashing on my screen. "Ava will fill you in." I excused myself and walked off to my study and closed the door behind me. I had a fairly good idea as to what this call was about and would kill to not have this exchange. "Dad, I suppose now is a good time to talk?" The start of the conversation was hint enough that it was exactly what I thought it was about. "Yeah, pretty good. You have been avoiding my calls," he said dryly. I let out a humorless chuckle. "I had no reason to avoid your calls, did I?" There was a crisp edge to my voice. Even if he did catch on to the note of ill-disposed sarcasm in my words, he didn't show it. None I could think of. He took a beat. "Your grandfather's will. I hope you remember that." I rarely regretted my decision. It was one such instance. I regretted picking up the call. "I do." "And?" I heard him heave a sigh of disappointment. "Rylan, you have worked hard for Parker Realty, and I hope you know how much effort I have put into our business, in taking it where it is. I would hate for it all to go to waste." "I know." "And what have you done about it?" "You only have 6 months left, Rylan. Have you found someone suitable for marriage?" Narrating our experience at the diner to Stacy seemed a more tolerable alternative to the discussions I had been thrust into. In fact, I would have done anything to get out of this. "I'm seeing someone." The words were out of my mouth without thinking. After a long few seconds of silence, he asked, "You're seeing someone?" It was done, and now I couldn't go back. "I believe that's what I said." "Yes." "So why haven't we met her?" His question came out quick and with a tone of underlying suspicion. "Well, I wanted to know her, make sure I wasn't making any bad decisions." I kept my voice even. "Right. Brings you dinner this weekend." This told me he still had his doubts. I wasn't surprised by it, though. He was my father and knew me too well. "I'll be busy." I made up at once. There were a few meetings, but nothing that couldn't be rescheduled. I pressed my lips together in sheer annoyance. He wasn't letting it pass, and I wouldn't be able to avoid him for much longer. Next month. Well, now that it's settled, I would like to get back to my work now. Of course. Only after he hung up did I take a moment to realize the consequences of my unthinking lie. I had until next month to find myself a girlfriend. Fuck. Chapter 05. "Elena! Mom!" I called after closing the door behind me. I had moved back in the day. Dad was back from the hospital. I wanted to be there for him. Well, the other half of the reason was that it actually helped with minimizing the expenses. "In here." I followed her voice to the kitchen. She stood behind the counter making dinner for Dad. I went straight for a hug. She patted my shoulder, returning the hug. "Well, you are happy. What is it?" I loosened my hold around her. "I got the job at the Knights." Her face broke in a grin once the news settled in. "You got the job. Well done, honey," she gushed. "I never doubted my daughter for a second. I knew you would get it." Dad's eyes shone with pride, and that one sight alone could compensate for all of my hard work. "I know, Dad. You always believe in me." I sat down beside him. Putting my head on his shoulder, I heaved a sigh of relief. Dad placed his hand on mine and gave it a gentle squeeze. "G? G?" "Chi, chi, 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 n, chi, 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 chew, chi, chew, chi, 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 chew, right now, and here's the draft. Make the necessary changes and bring them back to me," I said, sliding the file across the table. Sure, it's been a week since I had joined as the HR manager, and to be honest, I had some really inefficient subordinates. I was left under a lot of work pressure. But I knew that I was going to make this work. I had to. I hadn't yet had the time to get well acquainted with someone, and judging by the way I rushed off as soon as work hours were over, the possibility of this happening sounded pretty far-fetched. I leaned back in my seat to relieve my neck that hurt from sitting straight for hours. My phone rang only a second later. It was an unknown number. I waited for the person to speak first, something I have always done. Rylan Parker this side. "Am I speaking to Miss Smith?" The familiar, authoritative voice filled the brief silence. Rylan Parker, as in Ava's father. I remembered that name, but what I didn't remember was any unfinished business that he could call me for. "Speaking. How may I help you?" I heard some shuffling on the other side. The reply came out rather quick and unhesitant. "I would like to see you at my office tomorrow." That's it? He wasn't even going to offer a reason behind the request he made that wasn't even a request in the first place? Figured I should just ask myself, can I know why? No. I pulled the phone away from my ear and blinked at the audacity of this man. "Excuse me?" I chuckled, disbelievingly. "I'm afraid that it's a bit confidential to be discussed over a phone call." Why was I having the feeling that it wasn't something good? As far as I could recollect, there was no possible horizon where our interests might meet, let alone a confidential talk. "I'm getting a little apprehensive here." "What is the matter?" I asked once more, hoping I would get something to feed my curiosity. "I'll tell you that once we meet." It was concerning that he didn't even say that I needn't worry. Then again, the short interaction with him didn't exactly put him forward as genial. I sighed in annoyance and tapped my right foot on the floor. "Not tomorrow. I want to meet today," I demanded. A day's wait seemed like too much work. I needed to sleep at night, and my curiosity had reached a level where it wouldn't allow me to. "Well, that can be arranged," he said after a second of deliberation. "I'll send you my car." "Yeah, thanks. Mama taught me better. I have my car. Just send me the address." "When should I be expecting you?" I glanced at my watch. Does 4 sound good? It does. See you? I hummed before hanging up. Pressing my lips together, I regarded the shit ton of work I would have to complete if I were to leave early and meet Rylan Parker. "Excuse me, I am here to meet Rylan Parker." At exactly 5 minutes before the stipulated time, I found myself in the elegantly designed lobby of Parker Realty. If I wasn't worried about the promised chat, I would have drooled over the expensive interiors. The middle-aged lady in the reception looked up to give me a disinterested once-over. "Do you have an appointment?" "I guess. Can you check with him?" "He asked me to be here at 4. After directing a long, assessing gaze at me, she nodded. "Can I get your name?" "Elena Smith." Another nod. She spoke over the phone before hastily keeping it down. "Mr. Parker is expecting you." Thanking her, I took the elevator, which stopped at the required floor with a ding. Since the moment I had set a foot inside the building, my mind had been racing with all sorts of possibilities. I just wanted to get it over with. I knocked at the door to the CEO's cabin and heard a gruff come in. There was that godlike man, seated behind his table, his eyes completely trained on his laptop screen. If I said he looked handsome that day, he looked devastating in formals. The fitted navy suit did nothing to hide his defined biceps and muscular shoulder. I could go for hours by just looking at him, but that wasn't why I was here in the first place. He looked up at me, and a flare of that familiar something went through his eyes. "Miss Smith." He nodded curtly and gestured to take a seat without taking his eyes off my face. His unfaltering gaze had left me feeling conscious. "What did you have to discuss?" I asked once I had taken a seat. I pushed the hair behind my shoulders. He let his eyes linger for another few seconds before picking up a file from his desk and sliding it towards me. I raised a brow in question. "What is this?" Read it, he said. I didn't like his attitude. He behaved as if he was the one signing my paychecks. Without giving it much thought, I picked up the file and started reading through the pages, and to say I was appalled was an understatement. I'm sorry, is this some kind of a joke? Because I'm clearly not in the mood for it. My mouth twisted into a humorless chuckle. Good thing, I don't joke. He lifted his shoulder in a casual shrug. You mean this is exactly what I think this is? I slammed the file on the desk. His eyes followed my movement before they traveled back to my face. A marriage contract? Yes. He calmly acknowledged, contrasting the state of mind I was in. This wasn't even in the list of prospects that I had imagined could be the reasons for the meeting. What does this mean? I gritted through my teeth. This means that we are going to be married for 2 years and I can read. I gritted the words out, stopping him in the middle of his unhelpful explanation. He spoke as if he was explaining his work schedule for the day and not a whole ass marriage. Good for you. I could bet that he was trying to get a rise out of me with his infuriating remarks. Why in the world will I marry you? The way my voice still sounded composed surprised me. Because? He trailed off, looking for the suitable words. I need you to, he offered. I stared at him, unblinking. It took everything in me to not round the table and slap him across the face. Forcing a breath out, I stood up to leave. Wait! I'll explain. There was the slightest sense of urgency in his voice. Save it. I'll live. Chapter 06. Elena, hear me out. The way my name rolled off his tongue did something stupid to my stomach. Did I just relish the sound of my name from the mouth of the person who had offered me a marriage contract? Yeah. I was worried for myself. I sat back down and tilted my head to the side, waiting for him to get on with it. You would get a job here and I'll offer you thrice your current salary. You won't have to work 2 jobs. We need to be married for 2 years. After that, we can go our separate ways. I replayed his words in my mind. Yep. He did miss the part where he explained what he would get out of it. What's in it for you? He seemed to be reflecting on his answer, stroking his chin in the process. My grandfather's will, I need to get married by the end of this year or I'll lose the business to someone. The first thought that came to me was that this granddaddy must have been demented while alive. Mom always thought that we shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but who in their sane mind would write such a will? Rylan was in a way being forced to marry. But the dash of sympathy that I might have felt for him vanished in thin air the moment my eyes fell back on his arrogant face. He tapped his index finger, probably waiting for me to say something. Where's Ava's mother? Not in the picture. This time, the answer was a little too spontaneous. Anything else? The way he said it was hint enough that this topic was not up for further discussion. Maybe. Struck a sour note there. Well, I'll move on. Why me? You can get anyone to play your pretend wife. I narrowed my gaze at him. It's true. He had the looks, the money. He could definitely find someone who, with some luck, would have been a little more eager to play the part. I have a daughter. I can't just let anyone into my house. Except for that one time at the diner, he had never seen me. We had exchanged 2 to 3 words and I didn't fall under anyone? Putting my arm on the table, I leaned in a bit. And what makes you think that I'm the right choice? The corner of his mouth twisted in the faintest of smirk. What do you think? Leaning back, he put his elbow on the armrest. The silence stretched out between us as I held his stare. My eyes widened in realization. A background check, I whisper, yelled as if I was the one engaging in unethical practices, not him. I should have realized it when he mentioned 2 jobs while he had seen me only at the treats. You! I can't. My words were failing me. A fresh surge of fury rose in me, and so did the urge to break his perfect jawline. Rylan pushed a glass of water towards me. It was necessary. I needed to make sure that I wasn't making the wrong decision. I let free a humorless chuckle, unbelieving that he had the audacity to say what he just did. None of this was necessary. The only thing necessary was for you to respect my privacy and leave me alone. I snarled those words at him. I didn't have a shameful past or a criminal record to hide, but I was a private person, and at the moment I felt extremely violated. I stood up, done with this bullshit. You know what? Fuck your necessity, and fuck you. For all I care, you can shove the contract up your ass. Could everyone outside hear us? I sure hoped they did. I had taken only a few steps towards the door when his next words stopped me. Your dad's surgery. I'll take care of it. I don't need your help, I snapped, feeling a flash of irritation at the fact that he thought of bringing this up. You sure do. The certainty in his declaration pricked at my skin. I had been busting my ass to make ends meet, and his verdict seemed to dismiss all that hard work for nothing. I don't. I gritted, and saw him tilt his head to the side. Thrusting his hands inside his pocket, he carried on with his depreciating little speech. It might be a little difficult to accept, but you and I both know that you could really do with an increased salary right now. I'll manage. I almost cringed at how weak I sounded with my statement. At this point, I could at least be honest with myself and accept that financially, I was still in a really tight spot. Even with the new job, it was difficult to cope up. Will you? Really? As far as I know, the surgery is expensive, isn't it? I clenched my eyes shut in frustration. He was right, and I absolutely hated it, every second of it. He walked closer until he was in my space. His minty breath hit me when he spoke next. You sign the papers, and your dad will be taken care of by the best of surgeons. I'll make sure of it. Wasn't it all that I could ask for, Dad getting the best treatment? Think this through. It's only a matter of 2 years. I wanted to know the exact moment when he realized that he almost had me convinced. I had heard it in his voice, the complacency. Swallowing down my pride, I said, I have some conditions. A pleased smile worked its way across his face. Let's sit and talk, shall we? You better wipe that look off your face. I grumbled in annoyance, to which he raised one perfectly shaped brow. You were saying? He prompted. My parents can't know about this. This whole fake marriage thing needs to be kept from them. If Dad was to know that I was preparing to pull off something as sacred as wedding as a part of a business deal, he might not be in need of a treatment any further. Mom, on the other hand, would probably disown me. Wedding and marriage is a very serious thing in our household. You just don't go playing with it. Don't sweat it. Nobody can know about this agreement. It's supposed to be between just the two of us. His voice deepened with an undertone of threat, fueling my irritation. It's a shame that a person this obnoxious was given a face as beautiful as that. And second thing, this won't be a fake marriage. We are having a very real wedding. I swear he was starting to regret this deal because those words could be the fastest way to get my ass out of this building. Not very sound, but I could actually live without realizing the depth of the decision I was making. The illusion that this was just an arrangement that was to last 2 years, wrapped like a blanket around me, might be temporary, but still a blanket. Whatever! There's one more, I said, referring to the conditions. He looked on, conveying that he was listening. We won't have sex. For the first time today, I witnessed something other than undue amusement or cold indifference in his face. Tensed jaw, a slight twitch in his right eye. We won't. Then he added, unless you want to. I would never! I scoffed and couldn't be faster about it. Humor danced in his eyes at quick defense before the corner of his lips tugged up in a smirk. Never say never, love. The itch to swing at him resurfaced. The number of times violent thoughts towards him sprang up in my mind, and in such a short span of time, was scary. Could be an insight into how exciting 2 complete years with him would be. I scanned through every page looking for some absurd clauses, like I would have to hand out sexual services to him whenever asked for, or that the agreement under circumstances might extend over a year. Finding no such provision, I finally put my signature on it. The moment I set the pen down, my head started swarming with doubts. Feeling parched, I helped myself to the glass of water, all the while feeling Rylan's scrutinizing gaze on me. Now that it's settled, we need a story. A story? I asked. Of how we met. His face held the expression which clearly said that I was a bit dense. My brain hadn't quite processed the fact that I had actually signed those papers. It's not every day that one agrees to a contract marriage. At the diner. We met at the diner when Ava brought you there. I suggested it, and it was technically true. Rylan nodded once. That should do. Could I leave already? I had heard enough of this conceited man to last me a lifetime. I stole a glance at my watch. Are we done here? I have a job and I'm getting late. He stared at me blankly. You don't need that job anymore. Actually, I do until I get the appointment letter. I hated it when someone tried to dictate my actions. It was a feeble attempt at getting the point across. He sighed. Go home, Elena. You'll receive the appointment letter in an hour. And clear your schedule for tomorrow. We are meeting someone, he said, not looking up from the laptop screen while I stood there amazed at his lack of social refinement. Do you ever say please? I was ready to take it all back. Nothing about this man was beautiful. A fine sculpted face with the personality of a wild boar shouldn't count. No, he said after a long second stretched by. I was done talking to him for the day. My mind was made up. The only thing I was looking forward to was to go back home and take a nice warm bath. Chapter 07. Elena, you're late, Rylan declared as soon as I got into the passenger seat of his shiny black Maserati. The inside of the car smelled of musk and rich leather. I tisked, annoyed at him, and it had been only a couple of seconds in his vicinity. It was, 5 minutes past the stipulated time? Can you shut up? I don't want to hear your voice right now. He did shut up, but sat there staring ahead. Weren't we getting late like a minute ago? Being in such a closed space with him was enough of a punishment. Can you drive already? I watched Rylan cock his head to the side and assess me with one silent gaze before he leaned towards me till he was completely in my space. I squeaked, the spice and musk in his cologne making me feel a little dazed. The coffee and hazel eyes turned into something relatively darker, an indecipherable look passing through them. His overwhelming proximity had screwed with my head because my gaze dropped to his lips for a quick second. His jaw flexed, which was followed by the sound of a click. After the seatbelt was secured around me, he leaned back and gripped the steering wheel hard. Once I composed myself, I remarked, You could have just told me. I thought you didn't want to hear my voice. His response drew an eye roll from me. I was irked for certain. But what I was scared to admit was that whether the annoyance was because he pulled that stunt or because I had, for a tiny fraction, thought that he was going to kiss me. Whom are we meeting? I asked, looking outside the window. You'll see. Another eye roll. Wouldn't hurt him to offer a proper answer for once, would it? The silence that ensued allowed my mind to shift to more concerning subjects. I hadn't yet found a chance to broach the subject with my parents. I would have to tell a pack of lies before them, and there was a fair chance of me messing it up. That fear was what had stopped me from bringing it up last night at the dinner table. I can do this. It's easy. I had told myself after every practice session in front of the mirror. All that pep talk had gone down the toilet. I snapped out of my thoughts when I heard Rylan closing the car door behind him. So lost in my thoughts, I had failed to notice that we were in some basement parking. I unfastened the seatbelt, meaning to get out, when Rylan, to my utmost surprise, held the car door open for me. I quirked an eyebrow. Careful, I might mistake you for a gentleman. I was partially apprehensive that my comment might get him to close that door on my leg as I stepped out. His eyes glinted with scarcely perceptible amusement. Wouldn't want that. "Do you stay here?" I asked while he guided me to the elevator. Rylan typed in the code before responding with "I do. A private elevator?" The said elevator had opened to a penthouse. Rylan put in another code to let us in, and oh my God! I thought I had left my jaw on the floor outside. The place was huge, like a fortress, every corner of the living space immaculate. From where I stood, I saw a staircase at the end of the living area winding up to a second floor. "You stay here?" This time it actually wasn't a question. I was awestruck by the beauty of this monstrously large area. Whoever said that money can't buy happiness could find themselves a seat on a cactus. I have never been a believer of the idea anyway. Honestly, I would die for a penthouse like this. He gave me a blank stare. "Are you dense or deaf? You have a beautiful place, but why am I here?" I answered his question with one of mine. "I'll be back." He moved across the rich hardwood floor and disappeared down the hall, leaving me to inspect the expensive furniture and the paintings hanging on the walls. Only a second later, Rylan walked in, this time a familiar lady following close behind. "Stacy," as in Ava's nanny, "I am aware that you two have already met and know each other, but I wanted to introduce her to you." I was a little surprised by Rylan's gesture. He particularly didn't stand out to me as someone who would take time introducing his pretend would-be wife to his staff. Guess I judged too fast. "Elena, my girlfriend." A tiny shiver went down my spine. It could either be because of how foreign and absurd it felt to be introduced as Rylan's girlfriend, or it could be due to the fact that I was extremely aware of the warm hand resting at the low of my back. "I must say that your girlfriend is beautiful. I figured it out. It was the tag that's distressing." "I'm glad we met, Stacy," I said. "I do return the sentiment, Elena." Stacy warmly smiled at me, the skin around her eyes wrinkling that kind way before she added, "I work for Rylan. I'm Ava's nanny, as you already know." "Your family." We both turned our attention to Rylan, whose brows had dipped down just a bit. Despite his clipped interjection, his voice easily gave out that he was offended. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Stacy was important to him, and vice versa. It was the way Stacy stared back at him with affectionate eyes. She blinked away the sheen of moisture with a warm smile. "Rylan, why don't you show her around while I get her something?" She hardly got to complete the sentence when a squeaky little voice butted in. "Elena!" Ava sprinted her way to us. "Hey, sweetie." I squatted to Ava's height. "Did you come to see me?" she asked, gripping the crayons tightly in her hand. "I did." Ava seemed to be well pleased by my response. "Do you want to see my room?" Her eyes shone with excitement. How could one ever say no to a face that cute? Besides, I could really do with a moment away from Rylan. I would love to. It took her less than a beat to start dragging me upstairs to her room. Chapter 08. "Elena, you have a beautiful room, Ava." She looked up at me, a toothy grin splitting her face. It was all shades of pink put together. Pink was probably Ava's favorite color, explained her obsession with strawberry milkshakes. The bed was in the middle of the room, almost filled with plushies. My eyes fell on a drawing, presumably the one Ava was at before she got distracted. "Do you like butterflies?" I asked, picking up the sketchbook. "Yes." "They're so pretty." I smiled at her. My eyes were still lingering on the partly colored wings of the butterfly when Ava blurted the question out of the blue. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" My hand stilled on the sketchbook before I put it down. "Who told you that?" I casually asked. "I heard Daddy telling Stacy that you're his girlfriend." She replied, unhesitant. "Did she snoop on our conversation?" I sighed. "Well, that's true. Are you going to marry him?" Ava fired the question just as soon. I looked at her innocent, doughy eyes and mentally cursed. Why was I the one having this awkward talk with her instead of Rylan? I crouched in front of her. "Would you like that?" I was trying to choose my words carefully, acutely wary that she might have a meltdown at the prospect of her father's marriage. My unease increased with every passing second before she finally nodded. Then yes. Her face remained emotionless at my reply, like she didn't know whether to be happy about this piece of information. That means we won't be friends anymore. My forehead creased at her conclusion. Where did that come from? Holding her hands in mine, I drew her closer. Of course I'll be your friend. She met my assurance with a shake of her head. If you marry Daddy, you become my mommy. How can you be my friend? She ended with a head tilt, and I would have mused on how strikingly similar she looked to her father if her latest words hadn't fogged my brain. Mommy! I wasn't able to look past that one word and probably was a second away from hyperventilating. Ava. Rylan's deep baritone voice sliced through the air, clearing some of the haze. I was on my feet in a quick second. His eyes fell on me in a blank stare. Stacy needs your help. Come on. Ava skipped out of the room, and Rylan's eyes found mine one final time before he followed his daughter down the stairs. Rylan. Honestly, I myself hadn't expected Ava to look at things that way. I would much prefer she hadn't. That would just make things difficult for her because Elena wasn't here to stay. My gaze slid over Elena, who sat fidgeting in the passenger seat before I focused on the road. She had been a little lost ever since her interaction with Ava, which I had walked in on. I had seen that look on Elena's face. It was different from the surprise that I had felt. More than that. Shock. Anxiety. It was both. I knew she was considering backing out of the agreement and that she would bring it up. It was only a matter of time before she did. I can't do this, Elena divulged. Bingo! Can't do what? My eyes were trained on the road. Marry you. I can't marry you, I sighed. This whole conversation was a pointless one. She was legally bound by the contract, meaning she would have to walk down the aisle, at or against her will. Elena was growing agitated with every second I silently spent driving. Can't you hear me? I exhaled. A big one, and pulled over. It would have been easier to shut her out till the end of the drive, drop her at her home and be on my way, but figured I would appreciate her a little bit agreeable, given the fact that I was keeping it from everyone, including Dad. I unbuckled my seatbelt and leaned my head back, waiting for her to get on with it. I want out of this, she announced. Why? I asked, looking ahead. She shakily inhaled, an attempt at calming her nerves. One must really hate kids to be this worked up over such an incident. I never guessed it to be the case with Elena. She seemed to like Ava. I'm not ready to be a parent. I can't. But be her mother. Good, you don't need to. I brusquely broke it to her. She indignantly scoffed, striking at my barely there patience. I don't understand. There's nothing not understandable in this. I chose you because Ava will be comfortable around you in these 2 years. That's it. I paused, knowing full well that she would hate me a little more for my next words. Not that I cared. Besides, you must be knowing that you have signed a contract and that I can choose not to entertain all these talks because they don't mean shit. Exasperation drowned the earlier restlessness in Elena's eyes. Well, she needed a reality check. Her nostrils flared as she spoke. How generous of you. Well, you could thank me for it and we can get going, I suggested, tapping at the steering, and watched as she rolled her eyes while muttering something incoherent. Evening. And that's saying something considering we were at the end of the dinner. His hard stance, however, did very little to mask his infirmity. The dark patches under his eyes made him look tired and a lot older. It felt like a taunt. I had used his illness to get Elena to sign the papers. I pushed away the slightest guilt that was trying to fight its way in. It was easy to convince myself that I was doing Elena a favor. She couldn't have afforded the best treatment for her father with her salary even if she wanted to. Speaking of whom, I let my gaze fall on her. Her hair was pushed back, drawing my eyes to her long, slender neck. The tan color of the rather plain dress was doing an excellent job in bringing out the blue in her eyes. She let out a soft laugh at something the guy beside her told. Dean, was it? I didn't like the guy, I had decided. It wasn't at all due to the fact that Elena seemed a little too close to him. The guy had a remarkably cheery air around him, the easy charm and assertory smiles kind. I pulled my gaze back from them and focused on Elena's parents. Thank you for having me here. The food was amazing. The second part was directed towards Talia, who in response beamed with pleasure. We are glad to have you here. Yeah, I'm sure Roger didn't share the same sentiment. I smiled genially. Everyone was headed towards the sitting area when I caught up with Elena. Can I talk to you outside for a second? Her eyes narrowed for a split second before she remembered that we were putting up an act and we had observant eyes on us. Sure. She forced a smile on her face and followed me outside. How do you do that? Be a different person altogether? She asked once we were out of earshot. I fixed her with a blank stare, waiting for her to complete her question. Explain. She twisted her mouth in an upside-down smile and her shoulders lifted in a shrug. I mean, I hadn't known you like this, nice and charming. I observed her for a long second before I was walking towards her in slow, deliberate steps, stopping only when I had set foot in her space. You want me to be nice to you? It was a dangerous game I was playing. I knew it the moment Elena stared up at me through her thick lashes, locking those striking blue eyes with mine. But that's the allure of danger. You don't stop till it's ready to consume you, eat you alive. I didn't either. I leaned forward till the sweet vanilla smell of her hair was filling my nostrils. My lips were almost touching her ear when I whispered, To charm you? She shivered, which my ego liked to believe was because of me. I was tempted to kiss her, only for a second. An impaired judgment on my behalf. Exhaling, I pulled back. You wanted to talk, she said after a second stretched by reminding me of why I was outside in the first place. You were not supposed to speak of this agreement to anyone. I kept my voice low. And I didn't. Elena folded her arms across her chest. Don't lie to me, love. Stop calling me that. I'm not your love. She narrowed her eyes and whisper yelled. It's a habit. No need to be petulant about it. I don't mean it. I actually didn't. She took a deep, calming breath, the pale skin on her nose and cheeks flushing a light shade of red due to the cold. I didn't say anything to anyone, she said, referring to my earlier accusation. Then why was your father looking at me like that? Elena's forehead creased in confusion. Like what? He was giving me that hard look. He doesn't look impressed. Her eyebrows rose on their accord before the corner of her lips curved up in a wry smile. That's probably because his dad instincts are warning him against you. You see, he has always been very smart, she said with a shrug while I only had a blank stare to offer. I was trying to figure out if she actually had disclosed our agreement. Her face didn't say so. What? Not everyone has to like you, and you aren't that delightful either. She unfolded her arms and mockingly smiled at me. Mom is serving dessert. Come inside once you get over yourself. Saying this, Elena turned around, walking towards the door. I rubbed my chin in annoyance before thrusting my hands back in the pocket and following her inside. Chapter 09. Elena. Girl, I still can't believe you bagged that godlike man. Liv's eyes sparkled with excitement as she loudly whispered to me. I chuckled. Me neither. Such a cliché. The hotshot billionaire falls in love with the beautiful little waitress. I resisted the urge to scoff at her dreamy expression. Love. Right. She couldn't have been farther away from the truth. A week back, Liv wasn't this ecstatic about the whole affair when I first broke it to her. First on the list was suspicion. Can't blame her. You just don't one day out of a sudden announce your boyfriend to your best friend. They know from the very first eye contact. So this abrupt relationship was a bit much for her to stomach. It took a whole lot of convincing, and when we were finally past that phase, she felt betrayed. She said that I had curbed her rights as my best friend, and it was an absolute breach of best friend policy. Yep, she could be a bit dramatic. It made me feel even worse about lying to her. When she saw Rylan's picture, she said that she could justify why it all happened so fast. She said, and I quote, "A face that sexy can bring anyone to their knees." It was offensive. He didn't bring me to my anything. Far from it. Dean, on the other hand, had been a lot more skeptical. He didn't say much, but I knew he was having a hard time believing this story. And my parents? They were disheartened that I was in a relationship so serious that I was considering marriage, and yet I hadn't thought of telling them earlier, much less bringing Rylan home to meet them. On top of that was my decision to join Parker Realty. I felt like all I had done the past few days was disappoint the people who really mattered to me. Tell me, how good is he? Is he big? Liv nudged me with her elbow, pulling me back from the tiny guilt trip. Dean could clearly hear her. The shake of head gave it away. I'm not telling you that. I dismissed, or tried to. She dragged her chair closer to mine with unyielding enthusiasm shining in her eyes. Come on. He oozes sex appeal. You can smell it in the air. I need to know if he lives up to it. I knew she wouldn't relent unless I gave her something. But the thing is, I myself was, slightly less aware about the thing we were discussing. It's, however, an easy assumption that Rylan promised a good time in bed. It's in everything, from his rather sharp features to the way he carries himself in an Armani-tailored suit. I pushed the thought away as soon as it came to me. Earlier tonight when we were outside, a part of me had for the tiniest second thought that he would kiss me, and the scary part was that I wasn't repulsed by the thought. The last thing I needed was to think about his erotic potential. He's good, I added in a little coy smile to make it believable and get Liv off my back. She opened her mouth to say something when Mom cut in. One of you, help me with the dishes, she called from the kitchen. I'll do it, Dean volunteered. Look at him. Doesn't leave a chance to impress Talia. I nodded, agreeing to Liv's statement. Liv and Dean used to date back in mid-school, but then they broke up. They got over it pretty soon, though. My house has mostly been the hangout spot for us. While one reason could be all the snacks Mom loved to prepare for us, the split between Dean's parents was potentially the other one. He was very young when his mother remarried and never looked back. He wasn't in the best place with his dad, either. The only thing that mattered to Mr. Baxter was his business. As for Liv, she had lost her mom freshman year. Speeding car, a terrible road accident. I saw her get through it, her and Dean both, and it just made me feel so lucky to have my parents with me in every step of my life. Except this time, I was keeping them out of it, lying to their faces. I sighed. Oh, he doesn't need to. I am already impressed with him. He side-hugged Mom and poked his tongue at us. Of course, he is your favorite child, I muttered, staring at my phone. He might be? Our heads snapped towards Mom, who patted Dean's cheek. Mom? How can you say that? Me and Liv exclaimed at the same time. Stop whining, you two, and help me clean up the table. We pulled our asses up and engaged in the work assigned to us. I was putting the leftovers in the fridge when Liv loudly cleared her throat. So, I approve of your boyfriend, she declared like she hadn't told me already. It was her way of getting a word out of everyone. Mom smiled. So do I. I don't. Dad was sitting at the end of the table. Mom's lips flattened into a thin line. We don't want your inputs here. You would never approve of any potential man for your daughter. Her accusation was true. Dad never liked any of my boyfriends. I chuckled at the face Dad had pulled. Well, I don't want to lose my daughter so soon, he grumbled. Dad, you're never losing me. He returned my smile. Dean? I looked up too, curious about his answer. He glanced at me for a second before thrusting his hands in his pocket. I don't know what I think about him. Did he not buy our act? Why was he staring at me like he was trying to figure out a puzzle? That was enlightening, Liv chirped, slicing through the tension between us. And I realized something. I needed to be more careful. Chapter 10. Elena. I was going through my mail when the phone rang. "Elena speaking, how may I?" a familiar voice interrupted. "My cabin, now!" And there was a beep indicating that he had hung up. I blinked while still processing it. Did no one ever think of teaching him some manners? "Sure," I answered the line, which was, well, dead. I took the elevator to his floor and was very soon in front of his cabin. The CEO's cabin was on a completely different floor, just the one above mine. He grunted, "Come in on knocking." Except his gaze wasn't trained on his laptop screen, unlike usual. It was on me. "How may I help you, Mr. Parker?" Rylan's eyes twitched for an imperceptible moment. What I had picked up from our interactions was a sign that he wasn't pleased about something. "It's Rylan for you. I'm afraid you're my boss here." "And that's why you do as I say," he stated, too calmly, as if raising his voice was beneath him. "You're infuriating. I've been told worse." I rolled my eyes, contemplating whether to bolt out of the room. He probably saw it. "Elena, take a seat." I didn't want to. First reason was, he made everything he says sound like an order. More so because the last time he asked me to take a seat ended up in me agreeing to a marriage contract. I folded my arms, staring defiantly at Rylan. He nodded to himself. "As you wish." He too stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. "You need to move in, with me if that isn't clear." "Excuse me?" I burst out. "You heard me. Why will I move in? Instincts are never wrong." I guessed he was going to say something that wouldn't be very pleasant, and there we were. He rounded the table and stopped at a considerable distance. Because apparently that's what couples who are about to get married do. "But ours is a marriage of convenience," I snapped. "And yet we are trying to convince people otherwise." I hated it. I hated the composure in his voice, and I hated the fact that he was right. I took a deep, calming breath, which actually didn't do much. I need time to tell my parents, my friends, and above all time to convince myself, because I was nowhere near ready to spend more hours with him. He surely knew how to push my buttons, and that couldn't be ideal for staying under one roof. "Well, you have till the end of this week." I opened and closed my mouth multiple times, stunned at his impudence. You know the feeling when you want to curse the shit out of someone, but your supply fails you? I was living that feeling. You get off on it, don't you? Knowing that you're in control of every fucking thing? I asked when I had finally found my words. Rylan thrust his hands in his pocket. "Well, it certainly does help me sleep better at night. I'm done here." I left before I acted on my violent instinct. Jew? Ass? 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 Jew? Jew? "We are meeting my dad for lunch. Be ready by 11. I had read Rylan's text. Twice. The second time pissing me off even more. He arranged a meeting with his father and didn't even bother to ask me if the time was convenient, not to mention the absence of a prior notice. Every single thing about this man screamed arrogant. Rylan stood outside my house leaning against his car. It felt weird that he was in a knit polo, chinos, and Converse sneakers after I had been seeing him in nothing but formals the past 2 weeks. He straightened up when he saw me approaching. "I hope you don't feel bad because it was so convenient adjusting my schedule according to you and getting ready in all but an hour," I sneered. He stared blankly at me before throwing a gruff, "Get in." My sneer turned into a full scowl. I didn't take orders from anyone, much less him. "Say please." He halted in his steps and looked at me. "What?" "You gave out an order. Make it a request." I was done with him and his bossy tone. I would rather him make it fast if he was to make it to lunch on time. "Or what?" He raised a brow, looking already bored by the conversation. "I'm not getting in." I folded my arms against my chest. He gave me an incredulous look. "Are we seriously doing this?" I shrugged in response. "You kind of just ordered me to be ready for a lunch meeting that I had no prior notice of." "The least you can do is not give another," he cut in. "I would have told you yesterday if you hadn't stormed out of my cabin." He offered a lame-ass excuse. What about a text last night? I figured there's no point in telling him that. Well, I'm not getting in unless you say please. I took his earlier spot, leaning against his car. And luckily, we have all the time in the world because we aren't getting late for lunch or something. His jaw flexed as he deliberated on his options. Elena, get in, please. That wasn't very good because he slightly gritted out the last part, but I had made my point and I could work with that. Sure. He shut the door after me and got in the driver's seat. I secured the seatbelt around me. I'm revolted by the awful lot of time I have been spending in your vicinity lately. I suppose you must be really excited at the prospect of moving in. Mm-hmm. Can't wait. Why didn't you just send your driver to pick me up? I would have liked that a lot better. Can't say I didn't want to. Grandmother wouldn't have been very pleased. I couldn't help the corner of my lips from curving up. It was funny imagining this giant, arrogant man getting scolded by his grandmother. I chuckled. So the bossy and arrogant Mr. Rack. I get it. All has someone who can keep his ass online. Excuse me? I grinned, enjoying the offended tone in his words. Excused? He exhaled, somewhat exasperated. I looked out of the window, my mood relatively better than it was in the morning. I hope you remember the story. He decided to break the comfortable silence that I wasn't minding at all. Grams will be wanting to hear everything from you about how we met and... Huh, he trailed off. Fell in love. Don't worry, I have it all memorized. You kind of don't forget it when all you have done last week is try and sell this story to your family. I went back to staring outside because thinking about it kind of unnerved me, especially since that reaction from Dean. We were soon in front of the Parker mansion. After seeing Rylan's penthouse, I wasn't guessing that a spread-out luxurious mansion in a respectable suburb would be his father's preference. Here! Rylan's voice pulled my attention back. He was holding out a black velvet box towards me. Put it on. My heart was beating real fast. I could hear it. Unfortunately, it wasn't out of excitement, but because of the way it was happening. It wasn't the most special moment of my life like it was supposed to be. It was nothing like I had imagined it would be. I wasn't giddy with love or any sort of euphoric emotions whatsoever, not a single happy tear, nothing. Just one cold, dead moment. I sucked in a breath and opened it. Without even realizing, I let out an audible gasp. My gaze was fixed on the intricate ring with the most beautiful blue solitaire diamond I had ever set my eyes on. Not that I've seen many. It must be really expensive, I said, dragging my eyes off the ring. He squinted his eyes and looked ahead. Didn't leave a dent in my bank account, if that's what you're worried about. This is beautiful, but I can't take it, I said, closing it back. This is too much. I meant it. It may not be something too noticeable for Rylan, but it was for me. Well, we don't exactly have a choice now because I need my dad to see the engagement ring on your finger. His dad. The way Rylan said it told me that his dad won't be easy to convince. That's why the ring. When I still hadn't made a move, he sighed and took it back from me. There you go, he said, slipping the ring onto my finger. I felt the weight of it on my fingers, the weight of a big, fat lie. We are getting late. He had the door held open for me. I stepped out, trying not to be jittery about it all. Fake marriage or not, didn't hurt to make a good first impression on people I was going to see more of in the next 2 years. I smoothened the imaginary creases from my dress. When we're just in front of the front door, something really abrupt came out of my mouth. Am I looking fine? The question came out spontaneously before I could give it much thought. Rylan looked at me with just as much surprise flashing in his eyes. Way to make it awkward, Elena. Wait. Don't answer that. Embarrassed, I looked away and squeezed my eyes shut, probably hoping to magically conjure up a way for taking my words back. Something even more surprising fell from his lips. You look perfect. I swiftly turned back towards Rylan only to find him staring at me. I searched those beautiful hazel orbs. There wasn't a hint of mockery or deception in them. Had the words not been ringing loud and clear in my head, I would have believed that it was a mere imagination on my part. A warm voice cut in. "You're here! Come in." I guessed she was Rylan's grandmother, although she looked quite young to play the part. "Grams, meet Elena, my fiancée." The old lady shook her head at Rylan in slight disappointment. Could someone just get me out before she would start elaborating on how I didn't fit with her grandson? Wouldn't hurt you being a little more chipper with? The introduction. "I'm not meeting your teacher." Rylan gave her an unimpressed look, but she wasn't least bothered by it. She turned all her attention to me. For a second, I was nervous under her gaze before a smile broke out on her face. "Elena, I was so excited to meet you." She touched my arm with a certain warmth in her honey-brown orbs. "It's very nice to meet you too, Mrs. Parker." I smiled politely. "Mrs. Parker sounds too old. I'm only in my prime, sweetheart." I let out a small laugh at that. A little confession? I was hoping that his family members would resemble him in his social graces. So this came as a little surprise. Rose, as she asked me to call her, guided me inside. I discreetly kept stealing glances of the place. It was huge and just as magnificent. I bet the centerpiece itself was costlier than my year-worth earnings. When we reached the living area, a man probably in his late 40s walked in. "Mr. Parker? Why did no one in here look their age? Elena, right?" he asked, forwarding his hand. "I'm Samuel, Rylan's father." He flashed a warm smile at me, and I could see the striking similarities in their faces. Rylan looked a lot like his father, except I had never seen him properly smile. A smug grin or a sarcastic smirk didn't qualify. I took his hand. "You have a beautiful house, Mr. Spy." "Parker." Another calculating smile. "Thank you, Elena. Why don't we sit down and talk?" Chapter 11. R.Y. Lan. "Tell me, does Rylan treat you right?" Grams seriously asked her like Elena was dating a depraved or morally questionable man and not her grandson. Elena forced a smile on her face. "He does. He is a gentleman." Grams nodded to herself in approval before I saw her eyes shining with excitement. "So, how did you two meet?" I asked Rylan. But his vague answers didn't do it for me. I want the whole thing. Besides, he said that I would like it a lot better from you. She rambled, and I saw the slightest trace of nervousness flickering in Elena's eyes. Something told me the reason wasn't Grams but Dad. His silent, watchful presence could be a bit unnerving. I used to work at a diner where Ava used to visit with Stacy. Rylan had come along one day, and that's how we met. Well, this part was technically true. I don't believe it was love at first sight and all. This guy here doesn't have a single romantic bone in his body. Graham spoke with disapproval in her voice, as if I had wasted all these years not looking for love in every cafe and every corner of bookstores. It was a relief that Dad had decided to keep the details of Grandfather's will from her. She wouldn't have liked it very much. She was always the one for finding love, while Granddad just wanted me to settle down with a wife. On the contrary, I would say he is very romantic. Elena spoke with renewed enthusiasm. I had initially turned him down, but he didn't give up. From sending flowers to taking me out on dates, he did everything in his power to convince me otherwise. I caught the meaning behind her words. She was fabricating lies around the truths. "So you mean he was hell-bent on courting you?" Elena responded to Grams's question with a shy smile to sell the story. "But there's this one little thing. It didn't sound like me. Buying flowers, planning dates, I didn't do all this shit. That's not what I had expected. But seeing you, I must admit that you are worth the chase." Elena had successfully convinced Grams that I had chased her till she agreed to give me a chance. "Thank you." "And what was the proposal like?" There was this childlike excitement in her eyes. Oh, it was beautiful. He had taken me on a long drive. We were strolling down the beach, and at sunset he went on his knees to propose. It was the most romantic thing someone had ever done for me. She beamed before looking down at the ring settled on her finger. He didn't get me a ring until later. He wanted me to choose it myself. There are rare times when you are too stunned or stupefied to talk. It could be me at this exact moment. She was romanticizing me, and to what extent? Dad raised a questioning brow at me that said, I don't believe it. Trust me, Dad. I don't either. It's beautiful. Grams gushed, ensuring that she had totally bought the story. Dad cut in after being silent for a long time. You two are engaged, and you haven't moved in with Rylan yet. Any particular reasons, Elena? Elena was startled by this sudden question being thrown her way. She didn't see it coming. Her father's health hasn't been the best, and she wanted to stay with her dad and take care of him. I delivered. I hope he gets better, Grams told her. He's better now. Elena stood up and made her way towards me. And that's why we have decided that I will move in this weekend. She intertwined her hand with mine and smiled up at me. A single strand of hair fell on her face. My hand involuntarily came up and pushed it aside. I never thought I would see a day when Rylan would move on and love someone again. Grams gently squeezed her hand and sighed. I am so happy he found you. Elena's eyebrows gently furrowed at that, but she was quick in composing herself. I am lucky that he did. As my fiancé, she was supposed to know all about my past, except I wasn't ready to disclose it. I think we should talk the rest over lunch, Graham suggested. Dad stood up and offered. Elena and you go on. We will be right behind you. I pressed my lips in a thin line, wanting this day to be over already. Elena glanced at me, alarmed. I discreetly nodded, telling her not to worry. Elena seems like a lovely girl, Dad said once they were both out of vision. She is. I met his eyes, keeping my posture relaxed. Defense is the last thing he needed to observe in my stance. Now why would she join Parker Realty? I shrugged with as much nonchalance I could gather. People switch companies, don't they? And you admit to all those romantic gestures Elena mentioned, getting flowers and all that? With his hands thrust in his pockets, he took another step in my direction. See, here's what I don't get, I said, letting out a disbelieving chuckle. You wanted me to find a wife. I found someone I'm willing to marry. How is that a problem now? To anyone, it would seem like Dad didn't hear me. He replied with a cold. What exactly are you holding over her? We had been doing this throughout our conversation, answering questions with one of our own. I decided to offer a proper answer this time. Nothing. I'm holding nothing over her. I separated every word, loud and clear for him. Blackmail isn't something I resort to unless necessary. Manipulation? Yes. In fact, I would say manipulation is the most powerful tool to get one to their goals. But not blackmail. Not that it's beneath me. I just happen to like working my way with words a lot better. I watched the struggle of the person sitting in front of me, enjoy every second of the uncertainty in their eyes, till I witnessed the exact moment when they reach the breaking point. It fills every part of me with immense satisfaction to see them cross the line to this side, an odd sense of achievement. Dad sighed before placing a hand on my shoulder. Well, whatever it's you're doing, be very careful, son. One wrong step and the media will drag you down. His warning made it pretty clear that he didn't buy any part of Elena's heart-touching love story. Honestly, I wasn't fully expecting him to. Dad wasn't just a very successful businessman for nothing. Don't worry, Dad. Chapter 12. Elena. 10 minutes into the drive, and we still hadn't exchanged a word, and I wouldn't have traded this silence for the world. I prefer him looking pretty and his mouth shut, but rarely get what I want. So, you had been narrating this to your family and everyone else. I was after you like a lovesick puppy. His tone told me that he was anything but impressed with the story. Well, I wasn't aiming to do that either. Nice, isn't it? I kept my eyes trained outside the window. With all that shit you made up about me, flowers, and the sunset proposal, I'm surprised that Grams believed you. What would you prefer I say? We signed an agreement and you slid the engagement ring across the office desk. I bet it would sound like you, I snapped. He could have just told them about our meet-cutes himself instead of pushing it to me. Frankly, it wasn't just his remarks that had annoyed me. It was Rose. I saw her hanging on to every lie I told. She was genuinely happy that Rylan had found love after whatever shit had gone down in his life in the past. After I lied to my parents and my friends, I thought I couldn't have felt guiltier, but the guilt just kept adding on. You know right how much this fake marriage is going to hurt everyone. He glanced my way once before his eyes returned to the road. Well, the marriage isn't going to be a fake one. I gritted my teeth at his lame reply. You very well know what I mean. Did you not notice how much faith your grandmother has in this relationship? Imagine how upset she will be when all this ends. I brusquely spoke mainly because I felt bad about lying to these people who wanted only the best for us. What do you want me to do? I detected amusement in his voice. Make this a lifelong arrangement? Yeah, that's totally what I want, to get stuck with this obnoxious jerk for the rest of my life. You had a year, right? Maybe you could have actually found someone, tried knowing that person and got married for real. You could have actually found love, you know? He stopped the car before turning towards me. I didn't want to find love. I would very much like my life to go back to being normal as soon as possible. His brown orbs bore into mine, devoid of any trace of previous humor. Get out. He spoke in the much familiar cold tone. We were in front of my house. I sighed before looking at him once again. I don't want to see your face outside of the office as long as possible, I said. He tilted his head slightly to the left, causing my gaze to fall on his sharp jawline. Depends on your definition of long. Until this weekend long enough for you? I pressed my lips in a thin line before unbuckling the seatbelt. As soon as I stepped out of the Maserati, it was zooming out. Inhaling the smell of the fresh hot brew, I sighed. I had missed my coffee this morning, and it was my first cup of the day. Working without it felt like a punishment. Sitting through these interviews were tough, especially when most of the candidates aren't fully aware of what the job asks for. I put the cup down when there was a knock. Seconds later, a guy walked in. I think you left this in the conference room, he said, holding up my pen. I had seen him in Rylan's cabin a number of times. He was the assistant. I took the pen from his outstretched hand. Thank you for bringing it to me. It's nothing. He paused for a second before introducing himself. I'm Stephen. He flashed a boyish grin. Tall, brawny, thin-rimmed glasses. He was good-looking in a cute way. Elena, I responded. I'll let you get back to work. He stopped in his way and turned back. Hey, after work, some of us are going for drinks today. Would you like to join? He looked kind of nervous asking that. She won't. She'll be working late. Another voice, rich and distinctly low, razored in. Rylan had the ability to walk in and dominate a space simply with his presence. It was in the way he exuded confidence. He pinned Stephen down with a hard glare. Mr. Parker, are you done with the presentation? Rylan slightly tilted his head to the left while staring at him. The fact that I found that simple movement extremely attractive was a hint for me to enroll in therapy. If Stephen looked nervous before, he was shaking now. That was understandable. Rylan could be as intimidating as it gets. I thought you needed it by tomorrow. Now I need it by today. I'd advise you to get back to work instead of idle chit-chat. His each word was laced with relatively more disdain, like he was hardly tolerating the guy's presence here. I'll be on it. That poor guy was out of the door in a blink. I folded my arms against my chest. What makes you think you can make decisions for me? I hadn't decided if I wanted to go, but he just made it all irrelevant by deciding for me. The hazel eyes zeroed in on me, and that's how I realized that Rylan hadn't spared me a single glance throughout his entire conversation with Stephen. "Why aren't you wearing your ring?" His words were crisp and pointed, like knowing the whereabouts of that expensive piece of jewelry was the most important thing to him at the moment. Putting two and two together made me think, was he jealous? Did Rylan tyrannize Stephen because he heard him inviting me for drinks when I wasn't wearing the ring? It made perfect sense until it didn't. Rylan had no reason to be jealous. We weren't actually dating, and the times we weren't actually aiming for each other's throats was rare. I kept it in my bag. I don't know why I felt compelled to give an answer. "That doesn't answer my question. Could I maybe snap his neck or something without having to serve jail time? I was itching to." I sighed. "Because I'm not happy about this whole situation. I'm in, and wearing the ring makes everything feel all the more real." The ring on my finger made me feel the weight of all my lies. I hadn't noticed when he had covered the distance between us, one step away from crowding my space. "Living in denial won't help, love." He was close enough for me to smell the aftershave on him. "It is real. All of it. We are getting married." I don't know what irked me more, the talk of the inevitable future, or the fact that he held the power to unsettle me with a love. That single word made butterflies flutter in my stomach, and the idea alone made me want to run for the hills. "Will you put it on yourself, or do you need my help again?" I realized he was talking about the ring. I leveled him with a glare before walking back to my desk. My privacy had been reduced to a joke lately. The last thing I needed was for him to go through my bag. "Happy?" I held up my hand for him to see the ring on it. "Now can I get back to my work?" He left without so much as a word. Fucking infuriating. Chapter 13. Elena. It was Saturday, hence the day I was to move in with Rylan. I had been staying with my parents for some months, and Dad had grown very much accustomed to my presence. He was heartbroken that I was moving out just like the first time I did when I graduated school and went to college hostel. Mom was upset, but happy for me. Liv, on the other hand, had been really excited, and she promised to visit as soon as she could. Lately, she had been drowning in work, and her boss wasn't too amiable, to say the least. I flopped back on the bed, totally exhausted, and I wasn't even halfway done with all the unpacking. Organizing my room has always tired me more than anything. Here we were, talking about settling in at a new place. Rylan had Chris get my things to his house before he left for some meeting. That had explained his formal wear when he was earlier at my home to pick me up. That made me wonder why he was there in the first place. Chris was perfectly able to pick me up. The first time we met, I didn't take Rylan as the guy who would be willing to play chauffeur, but surprisingly, he had insisted on driving me to every family meetup, lunches, and dinners we had had in the past 1.5 months. Figuring out what's on Rylan Parker's mind was last on my bucket list, though. He's unpredictable, and I happen to like my life a lot more without the edge. "Elena!" Ava's cheery voice filled the room. When I arrived, she had fallen asleep while watching cartoons. Stacy said that Ava had a fever a few days back and the fatigue was still there. "Hey, sweetheart, come here!" I patted the space beside me. Once her gaze fell on the trolley bags and unpacked boxes on the ground, her smile morphed into an adorable pout. "I wanted to help you." My eyes strayed to one box that was yet to be unpacked. I had thought of opening it later, but would rather do it sooner if that had a chance at lifting Ava's mood. "Well, I do need your help opening this one." As expected, the smile returned to her face as she eagerly nodded. The box had mainly my books. Ava picked the one which had the brightest cover and held it to her chest. "Can I read it?" "You're too young to understand that, sweetheart." I chuckled at her fast-fading enthusiasm. "But I do have something for you." Ava's eyes glinted as I held out a few comics. I found them back at home while packing, sitting forgotten at the lowest shelf. Packed them too, figured she might enjoy them. She kept the previous book down just as soon and grabbed these. "Can I keep these?" I nodded and received a splitting grin in return. A fair deal, I would say. Who is this? Ava's attention had shifted to a photo frame. It was a childhood picture of me with Mom where I was sitting on the kitchen counter, and Mom was kissing my cheek from behind. This is me, and this is my mom. I smiled, remembering the times when I used to sit on the kitchen counter, watching Mom bake cookies and cakes. I had boxed up a few frames last night, the most important ones. Lost in reminiscing, I had failed to notice that Ava's eyes were blurry with tears and lips quivering. Ava, what's wrong? This question is what it took for the dam to break, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. What happened, sweetheart? Why are you crying? I was getting more perplexed with every second she spent silently crying. Come here. I pulled Ava to my lap and tucked away the loose strands of hair from her face. Now tell me, why are you crying? My mommy. She doesn't love me. I inhaled deeply, trying to process what she had said. Her mother. After I had signed the contract, I had looked him up on Google, and there wasn't a single thing about Ava's mother. Only if that bossy oaf had told me a bit more about her mother and why she was not in Ava's life. Today I would know how to handle this. Ava, who told you that? I tried to choose my words carefully. I know. Everyone lives with their family, but I live with only Dad. She left me because she didn't love me. Fresh set of tears fell from her eyes. The words spraying out of her mouth gave out the pain that was inside her. I couldn't imagine how hard it would have been for a child to think that she wasn't loved by her mother. Sighing, I phrased the words in my head because this was a sensitive issue for her, and to hurt her was the last of my intentions. Do you know what family is? I asked gently, wiping away her tears. She had said that everyone stayed with their family, and I wanted her to realize that she was with her family. The people who truly love you. Those people who are always there for you, protect you. Sniffing, she stared at me as I spoke to her. You have these people, don't you? Daddy is always there for you. He is your family. Stacy is your family. Your grandfather, Rose, they are your family. They love you and would hate to see you upset. You don't cry for people who have no regard for you. Dad had always told me this, but I felt the words would be too heavy for her. Besides, I didn't know what had happened with her mother and what was the reason she wasn't present in Ava's life. And now you are my family? I blinked in surprise. I am your family, I lied, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. Family stays with you, and I wasn't here to stay. The feeling of guilt reared its head. She gave a small nod. I rubbed circles on her back to soothe her, or I was kidding myself into thinking so, and in reality, it was a form of distraction for me. Can I call you Mommy? Ava blurted, making my hand freeze in its place. I was expecting her to ask this as much as I knew the answer to the question. That's right, I didn't. My mind was reeling with a lot of things, one of them being the conversation I had with Rylan. I'm not ready to be a parent. I can't. Doppy be her mother. Good, you don't need to. Elena? Ava called when I had been quiet for a really long time. Those big doe eyes were once again welling up at the prospect of being rejected for the second time in her life. I shut my eyes. I shouldn't. I really shouldn't. Yes. You can call me Mommy. The second the words left my mouth, I knew I had fucked up. I was trying to save her from a hurt by leading her towards a much bigger heartbreak. Really? Ava mumbled. I had surprised her as much as I had surprised myself. Me marrying her dad, us being a family, everything was to end in 2 years, and I didn't want to raise her hopes high, only to crush them. But one look at her sad, innocent face, and the rational part of my brain had refused to function. I settled for a smile, not trusting my words at the moment. Once Ava was assured that I wasn't kidding her, she squealed in delight and tackled me in a hug. I love you, Mommy. I felt guilty that I was leading her on knowing our future. Pulling away, I kissed her forehead to shut down the feeling of guilt. I love you too, I mumbled. Chapter 14. R.Y. Lan. It was one of the rare days when I felt that I would get a proper sleep. The endless meetings at the office today had truly and utterly exhausted me. Walking inside my room, I dropped my suit jacket on the bed. I was unstrapping the watch when the sound of the bathroom door clicking open alarmed me. A startled squeak followed. The fact that Elena had moved in had flown out of my mind. I wasn't used to sharing space with anyone, much alone in my bedroom. So it was weird seeing her standing in my room in nothing but a tiny towel that covered very less of those long, pale legs. Elena was fresh out of the shower. A water droplet from her sleek, wet hair dripped onto the skin right above the swell of her breast. My mind wandered to places it shouldn't. Like how one tug was all it would have taken to witness what was hidden beneath the towel, or how her soft skin would feel under my hands. Fuck! I felt all the blood rushing southwards. I needed a distraction. Fast. Pulling my eyes away, I tried steering my attention to anything that might help me get my mind off the inappropriate thoughts, but that was particularly difficult when the sweetness of the vanilla fragrance on Elena was all I could smell. I thought I heard the door to the bathroom click shut at some time, but I was too busy thinking about my grandmother's poodle. That little thing could shit. Those are the rarest instances when I had regretted my decisions. This was one such instance. Not even a day in my apartment, and she had thrown me back to my horny teenager days. I was visualizing dog shit to prevent myself from getting a raging hard-on. "What are you doing here?" Her voice broke through my chain of thoughts. This time when I looked, Elena had slipped into her PJs and something akin to disappointment spread through me. "This is my room?" I was surprised that it sounded as nonchalant as I wanted it to. Her brows dipped. "But you're not staying here, right?" "Wrong. I'm staying here." I took my tie off. She looked startled. Her voice came out almost panicky. "What? No, we can't be sharing a room." I let a faint smirk touch my lips. "Why? Afraid that you won't want to hold up the one condition of no sex that you put forward?" Irritation drowned the earlier alarm in those bright blue orbs. "Can you stop being so annoying for once? What do you want to do? Sleep in separate bedrooms and risk everyone knowing that all this is a muse?" Elena glared at me, still searching for an appropriate reply, but she knew I was right. It wasn't Stacy I was worried about. I had my staff to run their mouths, and obviously there's Ava. It took her a good few seconds before she heaved a sigh. "Go to bed. I'll take the couch," I suggested, which sounded more like an order before heading for a shower. By the time I had stepped out of the bathroom, Elena was sitting on the couch. She sprang up as soon as I was in her eyesight. "I'll take the couch," she offered. "No, the couch is too small for you." She paused only to scrutinize my face. "Besides, you need some proper sleep. You look like shit." "Thank you. Now go to bed." If there was something I hated more than tardiness was to repeat myself. Elena sunk into deep contemplation before finally she came up with a solution, albeit reluctantly. "Fine. Then no one sleeps on the couch." I stilled. She couldn't be meaning what I thought she was. There's enough space for the both of us here. Even though the words came out much softer than her previous sentence, I clearly heard it. I raised an eyebrow questionably. "Not minutes ago you were freaking out at the thought of staying in the same room, and now you're willing to share a bed, love?" Elena's face flushed at the tone in my words. "Don't flatter yourself. It's just that I'd feel bad if you have to sleep on the couch in your own room," she muttered. She was just being accommodating. That's all it was. Right. That wasn't too bad now that we would have to share an apartment and a bedroom for the next 2 years? I should be relieved. Except I wasn't. I blamed the hint of displeasure on the dragged-out conversation I would rather not engage in after a whole day of work. Sleep. I didn't look at Elena again. Having someone stay in my bedroom was hard enough. Sharing a bed could wait. By the time I came downstairs, she was deeply engaged in some animated conversation with Ava. Both of them were chatting and laughing, and for a second there was this strange feeling, like I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't. I scoffed away the thought as soon as it came to me. I didn't want to be a part of anything that comprised Elena, at least not anything real. She wasn't here to stay. I cleared my throat to make my presence known. "Good morning, Daddy," Ava chirped. "Good morning, sweetheart." I kissed her cheek before taking a seat at the table. My gaze strayed to Elena's face. I curtly nodded. She responded in a similar fashion. It was a good thing that Stacy wasn't here to witness our very awkward greeting, and I would very much like to take the liberty of thinking that Ava wasn't mature enough to notice. "What are we doing today? Movies?" I asked indulgently. Ava deserved more of my time than I spent with her. Work always kept me busy. Being a CEO of a successful business wasn't a child's play. It came with responsibilities, a lot at that. Sunday was an exception. This was one day in a week that I completely spent with Ava. Everyone in the office knew better than to disturb me today unless it's as important as it gets. "No, Mommy said that she will take me to see dogs," she said, bouncing out of excitement in her seat. I stilled, absolutely froze in my seat. Were my ears playing tricks on me, or did she actually say the word? Complete silence blanketed us for 2 whole seconds as I sat comprehending how the word had so casually made its way into the conversation. I lifted my eyes ever so slowly and let them fall on Elena. She flinched before casting her eyes away. Whatever look my eyes held had to go till Ava was here. She didn't deserve to see the ruthless version of me. I forced away every emotion from my face till it was utterly blank. "Can you go to the room, sweetheart? I need to talk to Elena." Stacy was there in a moment, helping Ava out of her chair as if she had sensed the urgency of the situation. I didn't meet her eyes or Ava's. My full attention was only on the squirming blonde seated in front of me. Chapter 15. Elena. The footsteps of Ava and Stacy retreated down the hall, taking away the last bit of sound with them. There was deadly silence looming over us as Rylan sat pinning me down with a stare. Scary, unnerving, blank. Dog shelter. She meant we are going to a dog shelter. I don't know what made me say it. No response. Nothing. Not even a muscle movement or a flicker of anything in his face. I understand if you don't like dogs or something," I blurted before deciding to shut up. Obviously, he wasn't concerned about some dogs at the moment. Another long second of deafening silence passed. "What are you trying to do?" The crisp coldness of his authoritative voice slashed through the air thick with tension. "Huh?" I blinked, not really catching the meaning of his words. "Ava is referring to you as her mother." "What game are you playing?" I blinked again, stupefied by his question. How were the sentences even related? Why will it be a game? She wanted to, and you what? Allowed her to call you Mommy? Just like that? The way his voice was measured, not giving out his emotions, one wouldn't know what kind of an answer he was looking forward to. "Yes," I muttered. Rylan slowly rose up from his seat and walked to the back of his chair. My eyes followed every movement of his. He was absolutely graceful. And scary. "Why?" Another cold question. "I clearly remember you saying how you're not ready to be her mother and wanting to call off the deal for the same." His eyes clashed with mine in a silent challenge to deny his claim. "So let me ask again. Why? Why would you let her think that you will be her mother when this is all going to be over in 2 years?" His words washed me over like a bucket of ice water. Cold, harsh truth. What would I have done? I had toned down my voice, a part of me feeling guilty of the matter. He raised a brow in dry amusement. "Let me think." He drummed his fingers on the wooden chair, pretending to think of the options I had had at my disposal at that time. "You could have told her no, knowing what is to happen in future. Do you even know how much it is going to hurt her when you leave?" I knew I wasn't right. But he wasn't in the place to accuse me when he was the one to put us in this situation. He should have thought of the possibility that his supposed wife may grow on his daughter. You should have thought of that before you came up with this contract. I snapped, which probably sounded immature because he hadn't raised his voice, not even once. He never did. As if raising his voice was much beneath him. There was a clench in his jaws. So that's what it is? Trying to get back at me because you think your hand has been forced in this contract? My lips parted in disbelief. Did he just imply that I was using his daughter to get back at him? I scoffed incredulously. Spare him a second and he could frame you as the most heartless person in a few minutes. First, you can't force my hand in anything. I'm well aware that we are mutually benefiting from this contract. I pushed my chair back and stood up. From my seat, Rylan appeared too intimidating for my liking. I folded my arms against my chest and leveled him with a glare of my own. And I'm not so cheap that I will take my anger or frustration out by hurting an innocent child. Rylan's slight head tilt told me that he didn't believe my words. I gritted my teeth in annoyance. This one man had been pushing all my buttons since the very beginning. I don't know what compelled me to offer an explanation when I didn't owe him any. She saw my childhood pic with Mom. She thinks that her mother isn't here with her because she doesn't love her. She was crying, and I didn't know what exactly to say because you so graciously refused to tell me about her mother. So I'm sorry that her tears made me conflicted. I'm sorry that I couldn't refuse her and break her heart. I pressed my lips together at the end of my monologue and breathed out, refusing to explain myself further. A little something cracked in his icy orbs, a flicker of anger before a mask of indifference fell on his face. Seconds passed. We held each other's stare, neither of us backing down from. Rylan was the one to finally break it. The next thing I knew, he was walking away and out of the door. You have absolutely the prettiest eyes that I have ever worked on. I offered a plastic smile in response to the makeup artist. That's the best I could manage. She probably had used these words to compliment every alternate client of hers. I couldn't wait for this to be over. My back hurt from sitting for hours in the same position, and the disdain for Rylan rolled in stronger. We were throwing an engagement party. Tonight. And I wasn't aware of the same until hours ago. Rylan, very courteously, decided to drop it on me post-breakfast this morning, his reason for this extremely early notification being, I forgot. He forgot. That's all I got. He didn't even try with that excuse, did he? All the while, he invited my friends and family, telling them that it was a surprise for me, but for some weird reason didn't inform me. On top of that, he threw the designer dress and makeup artists in my face. Rylan had some sort of a strange fixation with controlling the different aspects in his life that now, unfortunately, and very temporarily included me. The only reason I didn't put my foot down was because it was too much work to go out and choose a dress for myself at this 11th hour. It's done. Finally! I stood up, feeling a little numb waist down. Let's get you into the dress, darling. I stepped out of the robe, and two of them helped me get into the dusty pink gown. The dress was more gorgeous than any of those I have ever laid my eyes on. I was no expert in couture brands, but it would hardly take a genius to look at the details and know it's exorbitant. Probably not enough to put a dent in Rylan's pocket, though. There you go. You look absolutely beautiful. I walked to the mirror to get a complete look of myself and was stunned for a short second. For this one time, I chose to believe that the lady's words were honest. I hadn't felt this pretty in like forever. You did an amazing job. I smiled, and she grinned in absolute satisfaction. Just then, her eyes fell on something behind me. Are we done here? Rylan? He spoke as if he was late to an important meeting. Yes, I answered, turning around at the same time to face him. My breath hitched. Fuck, he was gorgeous. Muscles strained against the midnight blue suit fabric at the biceps, his shoulders looked even broader. The dark black hair was slicked back, and his cheekbones demanded all the attention they could get. Stop drooling, I had to tell myself. I cast a glance away before returning my eyes to Rylan's face. couldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he affected me. Or, I already did that. His lips tugged up in that smug, barely there smirk. Great! Just what he needed. Another boost to his hardly contained ego. Car's waiting. I squared my shoulders and walked out of the room as I heard Rylan say something like Stacy would show them out. It was going to be a long evening. Chapter 16. R.Y. Lan. It felt weird to think of where I was standing today, in the middle of my fucking engagement party. My engagement. Even the sound of it seemed absurd. I hadn't envisioned this day in my near or far future. Guess I had only my very dead grandfather to thank for having to marry a random woman with a great deal of attitude. Speaking of that blonde, I hadn't failed to notice earlier how difficult it seemed for her to not stare. She had seconds later faked a look of swift disinterest, but that didn't hide much. In all honesty, I was affected all the same, purely physical. But the attraction was there. There was no point in denying. My eyes strayed to the left of the hall where Elena stood socializing with people. I doubt she would remember the names of at least a quarter of them. I watched as the delicate curls framed her face. The dress fit her like a glove, accentuating every fucking curve. She was a gorgeous woman, even with the fake smile she had plastered on her face. The type who would stand out even if the night wasn't hers to begin with. Surely all the other men in the room tonight would agree on that. That was a random thought, I would say. Then why the sour aftertaste? I followed my sudden urge to walk up to Elena, who was then standing with her friends. As if she could sense me approaching, she looked my way. I saw her posture stiffening at the slightest before letting loose. She was getting better at this. "May I have this dance with you?" She offered me another plastic smile and put her hand in mine. I guided her to the dance floor before wrapping my hands around her waist. A second later, she placed her hand gently on my chest. "Just a month left until our wedding," Elena said as we kept swaying to the song. I flashed a smile in response. "Excited, are we?" I twirled her before pulling her closer. "So much! I can't wait to get away from you." Up this close, I could smell the mint on her. My eyes were drawn to her mouth, those plump lips painted a light shade of pink. I was tempted to pull her flush against me and claim her mouth, to find out how those lips tasted. Even though I resisted that urge, I couldn't stop my hand, which shot out and tucked a loose stray hair behind her ear. I'm sure girls would beg to differ. Her lips thinned in displeasure or maybe annoyance, and I could swear she wanted to deliver a hard kick to my shin or something. But she fell into character just as soon and threw her head back in forced laughter. Anyone looking from outside would mistake us for a couple disgustingly in love. "You're funny." At that compliment, I flashed her a bright, charming smile that always had women reacting in ways. Elena wasn't immune either, if the sharp inhale was any indication. I dipped her as the song came to an end. Even after pulling her up, I didn't let go. Something stopped me from it. The way her eyes dropped to my lips, should I just lean in? I blinked as there was a round of applause from all the guests. We went back to our roles, the plastic smiles finding their ways back to our face. Just then, I saw Ava approaching us with small, hurried steps. Careful. I picked her up in my arms and kissed the side of her head. She was immediately reaching for Elena. "You look so pretty." "Aw, thank you, sweetheart." Elena took her small hand in hers and kissed her palm. The way she always acted with Ava didn't sit well with me. It was beyond me how someone could be so affectionate towards a kid she had known for what, a year or so? I found it difficult to believe that people would at all invest in anything that wouldn't bring them returns. That too when she was repulsed by the idea of becoming a parent to Ava. Then again, she went ahead and let Ava call her mom. I still wasn't sure how to feel about that one. God, figuring her out was a hazard, one I currently wasn't in the mood for. "I missed you," my little girl said with pouty lips. She had spent the night at Dad's place. "You did?" I missed you too. I mirrored her expression. I swear you guys would make the cutest family. I looked up at, Olivia, was it? Her face held an awed expression. As I realized our positions, it's right that from anyone's perspective, we truly looked like a small, happy family. Exactly. As I needed. Elena. I am exhausted. Putting the bags aside, I plopped down on the living room sofa and proceeded to massage my paining toes. Shopping for the wedding dress turned out to be a really long and tiring day. Our crew consisted of Mom, Liv, Rose, and me. It took us a good few hours to choose a dress. By the time we were done with shoes and jewelry, I was beyond tired. I have no shame in admitting that even Rose had more energy than me. Here, take this. Dad handed us both 2 glasses of water before sitting beside me. Thanks. He glanced at the shopping bag before staring at me with a small smile. My little girl is getting married in a week. I suddenly feel so old, he said with a chuckle. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. It didn't go unnoticed by him either. What happened? Are you upset about something? He stroked my hair, looking at me in concern. No. Why will you say that? I forced a bigger smile on my face. I can tell when something is bothering you. What is it? He was right. He knew me too well, but I couldn't tell him. Nothing. I'm just nervous. The guilt of lying to everyone was starting to suffocate me. It was difficult for me to keep up the ruse when I hadn't had to lie to my parents in my entire life. Mom and Dad never gave me a reason to. I could always come clean to them about anything, unafraid. This was the first time that I couldn't, and it wasn't just because I would be violating the terms of the contract. I for certain knew that if Dad were to learn of the deal and that I was doing it for him, he would not let it happen at any cost. It would kill him to know that I was marrying someone so that I could pay his medical bills. You don't need to be nervous. Just enjoy your wedding. He smiled at me with his kind, warm eyes. I wrapped my hands around his waist and stuffed my face in his chest. I inhaled his smell, in which I had always found a strange feeling of comfort. He rubbed my back like he had done whenever I would be sad. You're going to be happy this time. He kissed my hair. I bit my lip, suppressing the urge in me to confess to him. Chapter 17. Elena. This is it. It was finally the day I was going to get married. I was going to get into a false relationship, deceive everyone. My mind was totally messed up. My reflection in the mirror stared right back at me, looking just as confused. I was feeling a hurricane of emotions. Happiness not being one of them. Pretending in front of everyone, trying not to have a breakdown and, actually getting married to that asshole. In short, I was the happiest bride in the world. And the paparazzi were just the cherry on top of everything. The news of our engagement was the headlines on the day after the party. The day we went to shop for bridesmaids' dresses, the paparazzi were outside the shop, and there were a lot of them. Rose had to call her bodyguards who escorted us to the car. And today, they were going to be even more in number. Elle, I don't get it. Why are you so nervous? It's not like you're marrying a stranger or a monster. Liv chuckled. Only if she knew how true her words were. I am not nervous. I shrugged. Really? But that says otherwise. Liv pointed at my feet as I went on tapping them against the floor. Fine, I am nervous. I feel restless. As much as I wanted to say everything, I could give out only this much. Ellie, come here. Dean pulled me into a tight hug. Everything is going to be fine, and if not, you have us. We will be just a call away. I rested my head on his chest. I know I can always count on you guys. I love you guys so much. I mumbled in his chest. Aw, we love you too. Liv joined in the hug. The sound of the door opening had us pulling away. It was Dad. His eyes immediately found me, and I saw the look of adoration all over his face. You look so beautiful, he whispered. I still remember the day when, as a child, you tried your mother's wedding dress. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Dad, My eyes were tearing up as well. Honestly, if I could, I would have never given your hand to any boy on this planet. Everyone present chuckled at his words. Don't make her cry. You will ruin her makeup. Mom playfully scolded him while looking at me with moist eyes. It's time. Well, fuck. Walking down the aisle, I had kept my eyes trained on the bouquet in my hand. My anxiety wouldn't have let me. Would one look at my face give away how unsettled I was? I stared up once I reached the end of it where Rylan stood. Dad put my hand in his before patting his shoulder. The warmth of his hands encasing mine felt oddly comforting, which was a bit ironic. Probably it was the knowledge that I wasn't the only one on the stage putting up an act. He was as much a part of the performance as me. And for the first time that day, I properly looked at him. Undoubtedly, he looked good, well more than good in his black tuxedo. He had the features to look absolutely handsome in almost everything. As I stood opposite him at the altar, my eyes met with his. His eyes were blank, refusing to give out any of what he was feeling, and his lips were pressed in a thin line. I forced my eyes away from his face to meet with an unfamiliar face. Behind him stood who seemed to be his best man. He was a tall, blonde guy with green eyes, sharp jawlines, and his cheekbones were to die for. He was just as handsome as Rylan was. Dear beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The priest started the ceremony. I unintentionally tightened my grip on Rylan's hand, but instead of smirking at me or anything, he gave a gentle squeeze. Rylan Alec Parker, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? I have. He spoke in an instant before looking at me with false love. Elena Lily Smith, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? Yes. Yeah, wholeheartedly. I had lost track of how many lies I have told since Rylan Parker had come crashing into my life. Rylan. Do you, Mr. Rylan Alec Parker, take Ms. Smile, Elena Lily Smith, as your legally wedded wife to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you apart? I do. It sounded emotionless before I put up a smile for the audience. Do you, Ms. Elena Lily Smith, take Mr. Rylan Alec Parker as your legally wedded husband to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for riche, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you apart? Judging by her tight grip on my hand and clenched jaws, I had this feeling that she wanted to run out of here. I do. She spoke after a second or two, and I released a breath I wasn't aware I was holding. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you as husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. I took a deep breath before I took a step forward. Holding her by the waist, I pulled her towards me. I could tell that her breath was caught in her throat. She released a shaky breath before our lips touched. Fuck. Her lips felt soft against mine, sweeter than I could have ever imagined. Addictive. Easy to get lost in. Took me quite a few seconds to actually pull away. The claps and cheers had by then died down. How long did the kiss actually last? Fuck if I knew. My mind was still in a bit of a frenzy from the sweet aftertaste. Our families congratulated us on the wedding before we took off in my car towards the reception venue. There will be paparazzi, no? I heard her tired voice. Obviously, I replied while typing on my phone. Ugh, I don't have it in me to deal with them, she said in a whiny tone. Sounds like a you problem? I put the phone back in my pocket and looked out of the window. Do you know what else is my problem? I slid my gaze back to her. You. I just want to kick you out of the car right now. She gritted her teeth in anger. Though I didn't quite understand why she was being so snappy all of a sudden, I must admit she looked funny. Pray tell me, what did I do to get kicked out of my own car? She looked at me like I was stupid to even ask that question. What did you not do? You manipulated me into signing this contract and marrying your stupid ass. Just because of you, I didn't get the chance to enjoy what is supposed to be the most magical day of one's life. I didn't get to marry the man of my dreams and start a happy, beautiful family life. And now, on top of that, you're coming off as more of an asshole than before. She inhaled, out of breath from her mini-rant. A familiar, strange feeling erupted in my chest, something I couldn't quite put a finger on. Who is it? It was out of my mouth before I could even stop it. Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. What? The man of your dreams! Who is it? Fuck! Why did I want to know? I was feeling this strange uneasiness in me, the desire to know the name of the guy. Maybe because I didn't want her to be seen with him during the span of our marriage and ruin my image. Yeah, that was it. Most definitely not you. She sassed, causing me to click my tongue in annoyance. Well, now that you have, once again re-establish the already known fact. Can I get the answer? My voice was a notch higher. Why would I tell you? She raised a brow at me. So you have a boyfriend? Unknowingly, my jaws clenched on their accord. Does that concern you? Taking a deep breath, I went back to looking outside. No, I gritted out. Then just shut up. Why don't you? I rolled my eyes before silence prevailed over the rest of the journey. Chapter 18. Elena. This pretense was getting more than boring. I danced with Rylan, a fake sweet smile etched on my face while I imagined things like how good it was going to feel once I would get home after this was over and change into my PJs. My thoughts were interrupted when the blonde best man came up. Can I steal your wife for a dance? Rylan exhaled before nodding and walking away. May I? I smiled and put my hand in his and another on his shoulder. We danced to the soft flow of music, our steps in perfect sync with the beats. With the kind of grace Jace moved, he was a much better dancer than Rylan. We haven't officially met. I am Jace Andrews, Rylan's best friend. Though that explained why he was the best man, but it raised questions on his absence at the engagement. And why hadn't I heard about him all these days? Then again, Rylan wasn't civil enough to sit down and have a talk about his personal life unless it favored him. Since I had moved in, we had never had a proper conversation, and that's saying something considering we were sleeping in the same room. I hadn't even had the chance to ask him about his mother. Stopped on considering how the talk could become. I had offered my parents whatever I gathered from the internet. I shook away the thoughts of that idiot and brought my focus back on Jace. Elena Smith. Nice to meet you. I truly meant those words, as he seemed to be decent. That led me to think that even after being surrounded by a bunch of decent and nice people, how could Rylan be such a jerk? So, why haven't I seen you earlier like in our engagement party? He spun me around before we synchronized our steps to the now slower music. Rylan didn't invite me. He shrugged. Well, I was a little surprised, but not much. Considering his manners, it was a wonder that he at all had a friend. I let out an awkward laugh. What do you say in situations like this? Jace chuckled in response. Kidding. I was in Australia and closing a deal for my company. I apologize for not being able to attend the engagement party. He flashed an apologetic smile. I mentally groaned, thinking, why couldn't Rylan be more like him? Spending 2 years would have been so easy. Apology accepted. I smiled back at him. Do you like your honeymoon destination? He asked all of a sudden. Huh? I am sure my expression must have said something like, I haven't heard of the word honeymoon ever before in my life. I take it you don't know where you are going? He raised one of his perfectly shaped brows. I didn't even know we were going, I mumbled to myself. Sorry? His expression was one of slight confusion and a bit of amusement. No. Actually, I asked him, but he told me it is going to be a surprise. You know, he likes surprising me. I ended with a nervous chuckle. I see. He nodded, but there was something playful about his smile, as if he hadn't bought the story I had just delivered. Did he actually happen to know the equation between us? Rylan told him when he clearly warned me not to. Do you mind if I ask my daughter for a dance? I looked at Dad standing behind me. Jace nodded and moved away, letting Dad take his position. As soon as I stepped into his arms, most of the tension left my body. I never saw this day coming so soon. I put my hands and my head on his chest as we moved to the music. Me too. It was strange how his presence could comfort me in situations that he had no knowledge about. Now I can be at peace knowing that you are happy. This statement didn't sit well with me. Just because I'm married doesn't mean you can give up worrying about me, I mumbled in his chest, feeling the vibrations of his laughter. Rylan? I glanced Elena's way for the second time as she sat beside me staring out of the car. She was much less agitated compared to the ride to the reception venue, as if she was coming to terms with the fact that she was married for the next 2 years. I, on the other hand, didn't know how that made me feel. Chris pulled the car in front of my house. I held the car door open and watched as she dragged herself and that enormous dress out of my Maserati. Welcome, Elena. Stacy handed her a bouquet of fresh flowers. Elena offered a large, warm smile. Thank you, but I have been in this house, Stacy. It's your first time as Rylan's wife. I saw how the genuine smile on her face quickly dimmed. A few awkward seconds of silence passed between the three of us. If you two don't need anything else, then I should leave. Leave? Elena's brows slightly dipped in confusion. Yes, dear. I haven't been home in months. I thought now would be the best time. You two will be gone for your honeymoon. Even though I had asked her to stay as long as she wanted, Stacy was intent on coming back at the earliest. Enjoy your stay, Stacy, and spend a few more days there if you would, Elena said as if she had read my mind. Thank you, sweetheart. Stacy kindly smiled at her before looking at me. Chris will drive you. I wasn't good at expressing emotions, and she knew that. She had known me for my entire life, and I for sure didn't have to put out words to show that I care. Now that we are all alone in this fortress of yours? Elena trailed off from behind me. We can sleep in different bedrooms, can't we? Her words doused cold water over every obscene scenario that my mind had pictured in that span of time. With that long pause, she definitely knew what she was doing. The smirk tugging at her lips definitely proved my theory. I unbuttoned my blazer before taking slow, deliberate steps towards her. I had held her eyes all the while witnessing the smugness slowly draining out of her face. Uncertainty coated with a taint of excitement replaced it. In a few long moments, I was standing right in front of Elena. She stared up at me, a nervous energy radiating off her. Those sparkling blue orbs were too enthralling for my comfort. I leaned forward to the point that my cheek almost grazed hers. If not for that shaky breath she let out, I wouldn't have noticed how affected she was. I was fighting off my impulse to kiss the shit out of her. My lips faintly touched the base of her neck. And there it was. Fucking vanilla. That bloody smell had probably messed with some wires up there because lately I didn't hate it as much. We should. I spoke against her skin and felt a shiver travel up her body. Definitely. My mouth inched closer to her lips, which were pressed shut. Sleep in separate rooms. I pulled away in the very next second and schooled my features. Elena still seemed a little dazed, and that look of desire in her eyes. Fuck. That one look had my blood rushing south, and at what speed? Took her a good few seconds before she leveled me with a glare. Are you trying to seduce me? I don't know. Tell me, love. Do you want to be seduced? I raised an eyebrow and watched the irritation in her features grow. I'll pass. Your loss. I shrugged and heard a scoff in response. Must be difficult, housing all that narcissism in this small place, huh? She folded her arms against her chest, and from my peripheral vision, I noticed how that movement pushed her breasts up. Not wanting to ponder a second longer in thoughts of, well, that, I diverted the topic. Should I show you to the room, or would you in your sarcasm rather spend the night here? She rolled her eyes and unfolded her arms. Lead the way. Elena followed close behind. I stopped in front of the guest room. She took careful steps and poked her head in inspection of the room like some wild animal was to pounce on her the minute she would set a foot inside. She was still looking around when I decided to let her know about her honeymoon. We are leaving tomorrow at 5 a.m. Get your things packed by then. She spun around in record time. My things are in your room and are yet to be prohibited from entering it, I said, and walked out of the room, but not before seeing her roll her eyes. That would probably be the second time in the span of a few minutes. I heard her footsteps after me. Where are we going? I stopped in my steps but didn't turn back. You will find out. I spoke over my shoulder. Aw, so are you keeping it a surprise for your wife? It was now my turn to roll eyes before I took my time turning around. Fiji. We are going to Fiji. Elena seemed to be in some kind of thoughts as her teeth bit down on her lower lip. Something about that little action of hers really bothered me. I cleared my throat and looked away. So I should pack up for how many days? She asked after some long seconds. A week? She nodded. Now that it's settled, I need to get some work done. Don't bother unless you're dying. Good night to you too, I heard her after me. Since I'm updating after literally so long, here's 2 chapters for y'all. Enjoy the double updates and let me know how you like it.